We are going to move on to our next speaker. Our next speaker is going to present online. And this week we celebrated Africa Day. And Linda also mentioned that she mentioned made a couple of references to what's happening in Africa and West Africa. And our speaker today will be talking about how do we get networks and participation in Africa towards achieving or towards getting circular economy on the continent. So there's a number of activities with regards to circular economy that has been very well documented in what's happening in the rest of Africa. And our speaker today will speak about the role of networks and collaboration in Africa. Our speaker is Tuwanda Collins Muzamwezi. He is from the African Sustainability Consultants in Zimbabwe. And we are going to allow him to put up his presentation on Teams. Tuwanda. Also, please switch on your camera if you don't mind, and you can connect your presentation to the Teams screen.
Thank you very much, and you can hear me very clearly.
Yes, we can.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chairman, for this opportunity, and may I also thank the NCPC South Africa for arranging this event, and of course the government of South Africa and all key stakeholders. I'm glad to join you in this virtual manner. My apologies, I could not be with you physically as I have had to attend to an emergency situation. But all the same, we are talking about the circular economy. So my presentation this morning will talk about towards a circular economy, the role of networks and collaboration in Africa, how networks help us towards achieving a circular economy. And of course, as highlighted by the chairman, I'm the chief sustainability consultant for Toxiconsol Consultancy, also known as the African Sustainability Consultants. And of course, the last time I was in South Africa, I was still with the Business Council for Sustainable Development, Zimbabwe, where I've since retired. Just to let you know that this presentation is part of a PhD research that is going on with the University of Twente in the Netherlands. And I'm also glad to share some of the emerging issues that are coming through. And of course, before I go further, I also want to just acknowledge the director of the NCPC South Africa, Mr. Ndivu Rapulu, for leading the team and also inviting me to be participating in this event. I'm going to just go through an outline of my presentation so that we move forward. I will talk about the concept of the circular economy, what it is about, and why collaboration is important when it comes to the circular economy. It is possible for a company to operate as an individual organization, but also it is beneficial to operate together with other organizations. That's basically an overview of my profile and summary. I'm not going to be going through that for today's meeting, but I'm basically an international consultant with work in about 30 countries across the world, working in the area of resource efficiency, cleaner production, waste management, energy efficiency, on all those concepts, but working with industries and also working with governments across the African continent. So the outline of my presentation, as I earlier on said, that this presentation is part of a research that is actually going on, at a global level, but of course focusing on Africa. Like the chair said, yesterday was Africa Day, and we were celebrating our Africanness. and the renaissance of Africa and us taking Africa forward. But we as Africans, we need to have solutions to our own problems, including circular economy problems. So I'll just give an introduction, and then I'll talk about the global challenges of networks. I'll give a bit of a theoretical framework. Then I'll talk about the methodological approach. I'll also talk about the geographical morphology of networks, and then the challenges of networks and collaboration, and how we can make networks effective. At the end, I will also present some case studies in Africa, case studies in South Africa, case studies in Zimbabwe, case studies in Kenya, and case studies in Uganda, which demonstrate a circular economy. Ladies and gentlemen, as an introduction, environmental sustainability has become one of the major challenges affecting humanity today. We have got issues such as climate change, water pollution, ozone depletion, electronic waste, deforestation, waste, and hazardous chemicals. And according to the United Nations Secretary General, we are now in a place of no return. We are now in a place where we can no longer reverse some of these issues. So a circular economy, it can be a panacea to the global sustainability challenges. A circular economy is seen as a solution to those problems. And a circular economy is different from a linear economy, which is take, make, dispose. In the circular economy, we look at extraction, we design, we produce, we distribute, but also we recycle. We rechannel some resources back into the value chain, just like what the first presenter indicated. So the circular economy is an opportunity to deal with the global environmental challenges. But the question now is, how do individual companies achieve a circular economy on their own? Collaboration, partnerships can be a key solution towards a circular economy. So in this presentation, I really want to encourage you as an organization, as a university, as a mining company, or as an academic institution to collaborate with others if we are going to scale up a circular economy. And this is my proposition. Going forward, you will see that industrial development has been responsible for the majority of the environmental challenges that we face. And if we are going to achieve resource efficiency, we need partnerships. And the concept of a circular economy has proven its potential in developing and transition countries, but the implementation is still quite low across the African continent. Save for countries like South Africa, Tunisia, Morocco, the other countries are still struggling. So we have got what we call sustainable business networks. And these are networks of organizations which are collaborating together for information dissemination, capacity building, and sharing experiences. And these are the organizations that we are talking about in terms of whether they can help us to steer the circular economy forward. And it is also quite well known that research on networks has been lagging behind. And you also see that in Africa, very little evidence exists on the effect of network activities. You've got large networks, but the impact of their network activities has not been widely researched. And this is an area that needs to be looked at to say, how do we scale up network activities beyond team meetings, beyond workshops, beyond conferences, beyond just coming up with a newsletter? How can sustainable business networks help us? And these sustainable business networks, they are a group of organizations that promote resource efficiency services. The morphology is different. They could be business associations. In South Africa, you've got your National Business Initiative. In Zimbabwe, you've got the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe, Confederation of Zimbabwean Industry. There can be regional networks like your African Roundtable on Sustainable Consumption and Production. There can be international networks. So these are different forms of networks. The European Roundtable for Sustainable Consumption and Production, the Asia Pacific. And participation in networks can be voluntary. It can also be regulated. There are certain networks that are engineering driven, which make it mandatory for somebody to be a member. Others are voluntary. But we also need to find out, do voluntary networks perform better than those which are mandatory? That information, we need more empirical studies. We need more empirical research to understand that. So in this slide, what you see is the complicated relationships which are between organizations. One company providing information, one company providing knowledge, another company providing awareness and technical assistance, legal and policy support. So this is how networks collaborate. Sometimes it's not as linear as it appears in that picture, but I'm really to find out companies that are succeeding on their own without network collaboration. Yes, you can do well as an individual company, but you need to understand that when you collaborate with others, they're saying that if you want to go far, you should not go alone. If you want to go far, you should not go alone. So when you look at the sustainability theory, I think quite a well-known traditional theory, and the innovation theory, and also the organizational theory, particularly the institutional isomorphism, because companies, they try their own means to be similar to each other as a result of pressures. These pressures could be coercive pressures from the regulators. The pressures could be mimetic pressures from other companies, because when you see other companies doing a circular economy, companies also are drawn to want to implement a circular economy. The normative isomorphism from standards and norms. So the sustainable business networks and the collaboration then help us to achieve sustainable development. And this is the work that is being done by the NCPC of South Africa through the Cleaner Production Program, through the industrial symbiosis. And the previous speaker mentioned that when we talk of a circular economy, it's not only about waste management. I think there's that myopic thinking. There's that short-sighted thinking that a circular economy is about waste management only, but that is not true. When you look at the methodological approach that we are taking in this type of international research, when you do systematic literature reviews, document reviews, and of course key informant interviews with the network participants, there are quite a number of things that we are finding out. And in this collage of this slide, I show you typical networks that are existing already. The global RECIP net, which some of the organizations which are at this conference are part of, the African Roundtable on Sustainable Consumption, which is the regional network. The RECIP net is a global network. The Greening of Industry network is a global network, but of course, mostly Eurocentric. The Asia Pacific Net Roundtable on Sustainable Consumption and Production, the National Business Initiative, the Business Council for Sustainable Development Zimbabwe. Do these networks make an impact in our organizations? Are there benefits of network participation? These are key questions that we are also asking, because some of the networks do formal evaluations of their work. Some of them do not do formal evaluations of their work. So the encouragement in this conference is that if you are organizing a network, or if you are administering a network, please, can you regularly do network impact evaluations? Because you could just be doing team meetings. You could just be doing activities on the surface without an impact on the members. Are the network activities helping members? Among these, there are also networks that have collapsed. And also this study, it's looking at various countries and why networks fail. Some networks fail because of power struggles. Some networks fail because they don't have money to undertake network activities. Some networks fail because they've got poor governance. Some networks fail because of apathy. So as we collaborate on a circular economy, we need to understand why do we have these networks and how do they help us. The other thing is the cognitions. We look at the cognitions of network participation, and when I look at cognitions, I'm looking at the motivations. What are the motivations of being in a network? Some companies get into networks to improve resource efficiency, whereas some companies go into networks just for public relations, to get the information and get public relations just for the show. Once again, this slide presents the morphology of networks at industrial cluster level, at national level, at regional level, and at international level. But we must not only focus on the geographical aspect of networks. You know, here in Zimbabwe, we've got your Southerton Industrial Cluster, you've got your Stapleford Industrial Cluster, you've got your Workington Industrial Clusters, and these are groups of organizations within a geographical proximity. Okay, but again, you then see networks coming through as a result of thematic focus, because if in the geographical area some organizations close, then you end up without a network. So those networks which collaborate on a thematic basis, they seem to have a higher longevity. As I come to the end of my presentation, I want to present to you some challenges associated with the networks, or which networks are facing currently from the preliminary work that we've already done. Number one, there are corporate cultural differences between companies. So as organizations get into networks, there are corporate cultural differences of network participation. And also there are issues to do with financing of network activities. Some networks, they struggle because they don't have financing, whether they are based on subscriptions or other donations or other financing models. What I like about some of the programs that are happening in South Africa and that are happening in Kenya, that are happening in Egypt, is the self-sustainability of networks, the ability of the network to sustain its own activities. We have had networks, which are dependent on donor funding, where the activities, they are financed by donors, the network is run as a project, and beyond project financing, the network does not work. So that is a key challenge in terms of how we orient our networks. There is also the issue of loss of control of sustainability strategy at corporate level, the different contexts. In some countries, there is poor enforcement of regulation. So if there is no enforcement, the networks, the motivations of some of the members who are driven by laws can also be low. Then, of course, the risk associated with translating network concepts into profitable activities. Yes, there are a lot of things that are coming from the network, but are they profitable to the company? Do they fit into the strategy of the company? As I talk to CEOs, as I talk to business leaders, these are some of the issues that they are saying, that some of the network activities are not relevant. Some of the technologies are not context specific. You get a technology from America, you get a technology from Australia. You want to bring this technology into an African context. How do you tailor make it to the African situation? Yes, you can come up with improved cook stoves. The design you're getting of improved cook stove is from India, and you want to bring this into Gauteng. You want to bring this into Mpumalanga. You want to bring this into the Limpopo. How do we ensure that networks bring relevant technologies? Africa is not a destination for dumping technologies. Africa is not a lab for experiments to be done on the circular economy. So this is where the challenges are also coming. The other issue is poor management and governance. I'm not going to name any specific networks, but in some of the networks that I've seen in Africa, there have been issues of governance. And at certain points, those networks have had to then have committees that are rescuing them from secretariats, from leadership, which really goes to sleep and does not know how to manage networks. And in a number of times, we've been bailed out by South Africa in some of those networks. So the issue of management and governance determines whether a network succeeds. And then the network dependence. We don't want companies to depend on networks for everything.
If you want to do a waste management program, if you want to do an energy efficiency program or a water program, you depend on the network. You can't do anything of your own. You can no longer innovate. I think that is not a good thing. Then as we come to a close, we want to ask ourselves a question: are these networks effective in promoting a circular economy? I'll say yes and no. The context-specific factors in the country, they influence a lot. The corporate culture, the legal and policy regimes, really, if there's no enforcement of regulations, the proliferation of networks is really affected. You also see that there are some companies that get into networks for the wrong reasons, just because their competitor is also now in a network, or just because it's a fashion to be in a network. What are the motivations of companies in network activities? I have presented in this slide the factors affecting effectiveness of networks for a circular economy. Financing is required for the networks to work. Governance is also key. The power dynamics. We are having some networks where there is a fighting for power, fighting for control, fighting for leadership in the network. And we should never bring in politics into sustainability networks. We should not bring politics into round tables. We should not bring politics into industry associations. So some networks are then spending their time in these politics of leadership, politics of governance, West Africa versus East Africa, North Africa versus Southern Africa. Whether it's Asia versus Europe or Europe versus Africa. The power dynamics of networks. We are going to be looking further into that in the next year or two in terms of how the power dynamics affect networks. Administration and organizational capabilities. I was leading a network here in Zimbabwe and leading its own secretariat for 6 years before I retired, and there's a new secretariat. And the way they run the network also determines whether there's interest in membership and whether there's an impact. So we need to see the role of administration and organizational capabilities, the cognitions, the motivations that I spoke about, it, the legal and policy environment, technology access as well. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to say farewell to you in the next 2 to 3 minutes so that I don't eat much of the time. I'm going to present some African countries where there is potential of networking and how circular economy networks are actually proliferating in terms of promoting a circular economy. And I'm very proud of South Africa. Each time I come to Mzansi, when I look at the programs that are being done by the NCPC there. Well done, Mr. Chairman. Well done, Mr. Rapul. Well done, and all the team in the NCPC. The Industrial Symbiosis Program of South Africa and the case studies demonstrate the power of networks in promoting a circular economy. They are proven case studies also supported by the NCPC. So, and some of these activities are happening because of the network of companies that has been created by the NCPC. When you look at Zimbabwe, and I know that the last time when I was there in 2019 at the ICC at a similar conference, we spoke about the industrial energy efficiency. The previous speaker mentioned that the circular economy is not only about waste management. So we are seeing case studies of industrial energy efficiency and energy recovery in Zimbabwean enterprises, including heat recovery, condensate recovery, and achieving a circular economy. And this has been facilitated by participation in the BCSDZ, in the Business Council for Sustainable Development. We also have got the PET Recycling Company, which is a company that is a network of beverage manufacturers, a network of dairy companies who have come together to deal with polyethylene. And they've managed to reduce the amount of waste, PET, from the bottling sector. As we go to Kenya, you will see that in Kenya, there is the Global Compact Network, Kenya. My People Kenya, mainstreaming circular economy into corporate sustainability practice, collaborating on the principles of a global compact. The Kenya Climate Change Working Group, which is also promoting circularity in fighting climate change. Chemical leasing, the previous speaker mentioned chemical leasing, and we are also seeing chemical leasing case studies in Uganda, especially in the beverages companies of Uganda, using chemical leasing as a viable business model, promoting safe chemicals management and enabling a circular economy, again, through the networking activities facilitated by the Uganda NCPC. There's a greater acceptance of a circular economy. There's a greater acceptance of chemical leasing. This is my last slide. And to just sum up the experiences and the key lessons. Number one, networks are very critical in facilitating a circular economy. And the cognitions and motivations influence success factors. Let's have the right cognitions as we get into networks. The external factors can also provide success. This could be the policies, the laws of the country. They influence whether or not a network will be successful. To finance network activities is important for sustainability. And also, networks that are based on projects only, they may face challenges after the project has come to an end, whether you are being supported by an international organization, whether you are being supported financially to run network activities. The support you get should just be a leverage for you to do your network activities. We want to see networks becoming sustainable. We had networks like the Global RecipeNet, running across the world and promoting resource efficient and cleaner production. And what we need to see is also, members in such networks, for example, just honoring their subscriptions to ensure that the network thrives. A network governance model is required to provide effective management of networks, and also networks should engage stakeholders in determining priorities. Mr. Chairman, I think this is the end of my presentation. I want to thank you so much for giving me this chance, and all of you for following my presentation. In a nutshell, what I believe is Africa is in need of a circular economy, but we cannot achieve a circular economy as individual companies. We need to collaborate, we need to partner, we need to work together. There is no room for a silo mentality. There's no room for isolation. There's no room for not working with others. And I believe that together we can build a circular economy in Africa. Thank you so much.
we are going to move on to our next presentation. Our next presenter will have about an hour to present out. we have done very well in terms of time, so I think we'll have an opportunity for a couple of questions before we break for lunch. But our next presenter is Mr. Charl Harding from the Impact Catalyst. He will talk to us today about integrative just transition in a circular economy. We've heard about circular economy, we've heard about just transition. And so this wasn't just a case of saying, well, let's just put the two together. But it was really just to reflect on what the work that the Impact Catalyst have been doing and how important that is for the circular economy agenda as they continue to engage with a number of provinces and sectors on the just transition. So Mr. Harding was instrumental in the establishment of the Impact Catalyst, and it was officially launched by Anglo American, CSIR, Exaro, World Vision South Africa, and Zatar in 2019. And we will allow him to share with us what the Impact Catalyst have been doing. Thank you, Charl.
So good afternoon, everyone. So I'm so glad we are ahead of time because I'm the person standing between you and lunch, and hopefully the people that's online also have got a great lunch waiting for them. Obviously here at the ICC, the food is always great, so it's always a difficult space to be between the audience and lunch at the ICC. So so today I am going to present a bit about what the Impact Catalyst is doing around the just transition and in the circular economy. I don't want to make this an Impact Catalyst presentation, but rather a presentation in terms of principles, what we are doing, and I think it links very much towards what the previous speaker has said. So I'm just going to give you an overview of what it is, because I think it links very well into the previous speaker's presentation. So, the Impact Catalyst was created by a couple of organizations, the CSIR, Anglo America, Exaro, and Zatar and World Vision. And the reason for this is that many of the organizations realize that when you start looking at the 10 kilometers or 20 kilometers around your mine, it's really difficult to really make a big impact. If you want to make an impact, you need to look much broader. And the reason for this is that if you look at the mine, the more you spend money around the 5 kilometers radius around your mine, the more people move into that 5 kilometer radius around your mine, because it actually attracts more people because there's opportunities. So if you want to solve the socioeconomic problems, you actually have to look at a region to say, well, how do we as a region develop so that we create benefit for everybody in a region and not just create benefit around that small area around a specific organization. So the Impact Catalyst was born out of that to say, well, the only way to do regional development and the only way to really solve the problem is to work together in collaboration and basically create a platform that is then basically responsible for the socioeconomic impact through public-private partnerships. So basically creating an entity or a platform that says we will drive the collaboration on behalf of these partners, and on behalf of these partners we will look at how do we do projects that creates real sustainable benefits to communities over time. And of course it is done in public-private partnerships, and that's why you also see that as the founding members, the Office of the Premier and the Pope was also part of it. So because you cannot do socioeconomic development or any impact if you do not have public and private sector taking hands. The problems are too big, and if you don't take hands, you will never be able to solve some of the problems that we are facing. So the idea of the Impact Catalyst was to tackle really big programs and basically leveraging on collaboration And all of these projects or initiatives are basically designed for collective impact. They are cross-sectorial, and they're actually beyond the scale of what one organization can do. So when we started with the Impact Catalyst, we saw a lot of projects that was launched by companies, and they were like 1 million or 2 million rand programs. Those programs went from 1 to 2 million rand to hundreds of millions of rands. Because organizations are working together. They can pool funding, they can pool donor funding to actually make a difference, because it's much easier to actually attract funding if there's a collective saying, we all agree this is the right thing to do. And that is the challenge sometimes in a just transition or in the circular economy, is that everybody is trying to do their own things, and then it becomes very tricky. There's no collective voice. So what we're trying to do is to create that collective voice. So this is just what the Impact Catalyst looks like now. So it is growing every day, more partners being added every day. So it is, to some extent, mining heavy, but that's also changing. So we are talking to quite a number of forestry companies, retailers that want to join the Impact Catalyst. And basically we do have Impact Catalyst, Limpopo, Mpumalanga that we're busy with initiating, and then of course Northern Cape. And the reason why this is important is it shows that in each one of these provinces, the province, the Premier's office, and all the HODs are part of this process. And it also shows that it is now a collaboration between public and private sector. And then there's also national entities like the CSR and the IDC, which is part of this process and basically driving it. And then we have also some organizations that wants to be implementation partners that say, well, we will help you in certain things through preferential rates, or we can assist in some work. So when we started looking at whole Mpumalanga, because I think Mpumalanga is a very important region when you start talking about just transition and you talk about the green economy or circular economy, we realized there was a few things missing. So firstly, if you want to change a region, you actually must have some sort of common vision. So if you ask the big organizations as part of Impact Catalyst, the mines, and you ask the municipalities, and you ask the provincial government, what is the vision? Where are we going as a collective? Nobody can answer you. If I ask this audience today, because everybody has read a lot about the just transition, or just energy transition, and I ask everybody, so what is the common vision for our country in terms of the transition process? We are not going to get the same answers, because it doesn't exist. And the processes are driven in silos. And yes, there is different organizations that's integrating us from a bigger picture, but it's also not always integrated through the whole space, because at different levels you're going to find different pictures, because what you'll find in some of these big forums is going to be different. What the CEOs of organizations are going to say is going to be different from what the implementers in organizations are going to say. So we also realized that when we start talking to each one of our partners in Mpumalanga, that each one of these actually have their own just transition plan. Each organization has their little plan, say this is what we're going to do, this is what we're going to invest in, but none of these plans actually talk to each other. So there is no integrative plan to say, and I'm not talking about frameworks, I'm not talking about strategies, I'm talking about what are the 20 things what we're going to do to actually make a real difference. And if you say, what is the 20 projects that we as a collective are going to do? It doesn't exist. Because we haven't gone into that space to say, well, what are the big things we're going to do? And those 20 things that we want to do is, as examples, it might be a lot more, a lot less. There might be organizations that have specific projects, but yet again, it's not agreed to by the collective. The collective has to say we all are willing to back these things, because in our vision, this is where we're going. So if we do this, which is aligned with our vision, these are the things that we need to do to really drive the transition process. And then, of course, there's a lot of money floating around. and of course a lot of money that has been allocated to the just transition process in a country, but there is no integrative investment plan. So if we start looking at all the donations that's been pledged overseas, and you say, but great, where's the money going? And show me on a map where the money is going. Nobody can do it. Because yet again, it hasn't been done. It's still something that needs to be done. And then of course, and I might be shot for this, is that when you start talking to different organizations, the narrative is slightly different. So when you talk about just energy transition, there's a completely different narrative from certain organizations, for example, but there's a different narrative from the mines. The mines say, well, we're going to continue doing coal. Yes, we're not going to use coal for energy because we're transitioning, but we're going to use coal for something different. We're going to transition coal into something different. And then, of course, if you talk to different other organizations, they will say, well, but why don't we do agriculture? Why do we talk about jet? Because the energy component is not necessarily going to catch all the jobs. So if you want to catch jobs in the primary sector, so what are we talking about? So how do we catch jobs that's going to be lost by mines closing, power stations closing, and it is not necessarily be renewables? So how do we catch the jobs in the transition process? So of course, the whole narrative around the transition process is not necessarily aligned to what different organizations, different sectors, and different stakeholders are basically saying. And so we realized that we need to find a common narrative. And for example, in the Impact Catalyst and all the partners, we now have started talking about the just economic transition, because we need to transition economy, because not just energy. And like I said, I might be shot for this, but the problem is that if you want to create jobs, there are many other aspects that needs to be looked at. And if you want to transition, things like education and other things are important, because you can't transition if you don't have skills. So, and of course, then all of those things are not part of the discussion, because they are not part of the current narrative. And then, of course, you need a regional approach. So, and this is just an abstract out of the draft National Mine Closure Strategy. So, of course, as part of the whole transition process, mine closure and power station closure is at the heart of it process. And then I think this is on page 14 of the new mine closure strategy. It says that if you want to really do mine closure properly, you need to follow a regional approach. And it basically says, as example, the Impact Catalyst work that has been done. So interesting that we have been written into the mine closure strategy. But it is because of the process. So if you start looking at how do you do a collective approach to actually transition from one thing to the next, or really drive a theory of change, you need to do it as a collective. Otherwise, you are always, like the previous speaker stated, you're going to drive these silos, and these silos are not going to make the impact that you're going to achieve through a collective. So I'm not going to go into much detail around this. It's just a few slides to say, well, if you start looking at things like Mpumalanga and the whole circular economy, mining is at the heart of the province. All those little red blocks on the map are basically different mining sites, and all of these mining sites will be influenced through different levels of closure in the next few years. And if you start looking at, we did a study as part of the establishment of the Impact Catalyst. We did a hypothetical study. This is if we close 50% of the mines in Mpumalanga, 50% of the mines in Limpopo by argument say 2030, what will happen? So we did a whole study, economic study, and we actually modeled what will happen if you close 50% of the mine capacity, and 80% of the population in Limpopo will go into poverty. 80%. So what will happen in this process in Mpumalanga? Because if you look at the dependence on this one sector, and we're talking about the transition process, yet again, the question for me is, how do you catch the jobs? So the process of actually saying, well, we need to translate the current economy into a future economy. what does that process look like? And a circular economy is actually part of that process, because obviously if you start looking at waste and different products that is left behind during the closure process, that creates all of these big opportunities. And then, of course, there is quite a lot of plans around the green economy. I'm not going to go into detail. I just want to go into detail in terms of these slides. So what we've done is we try to pull in lots of stakeholders to say, well, what does the vision then for Mpumalanga look like? So we pulled in different stakeholders from the province, municipalities, all the corporates, and we went through a 2-day visioning workshop. And these are basically some of the drawings that came out of it. What was very interesting around the whole process is that the circular economy was actually part of the center of a lot of these things that comes out of the visioning process. But if you start looking at what comes out of the process, there's other things, and I think I'll show this slide, that actually comes out of it that I think was very surprising for most people. Because if you start looking at this picture, it basically says, what do we need to do to transition from where we are to the future? And then, of course, you'll see the bottom block says, we need to start looking at our healthcare of our people, because if you don't have healthy people, you don't have productive people. That's not part of the current narrative. It says we need to start looking at entrepreneurship. How do we enable people to have their own businesses? It highlights things like education. How do we transition into the fourth industrial revolution? And those things are currently, almost to some extent, excluded from the current narrative. So the question is, if you do, for lack of a better word, a grand design of a new economic aspect of, or new economic dimension for Mpumalanga, what does it look like? What you'll see is that we have narratives that drives only certain portions of this grand design. So what we need is a much bigger process to look at how do we include other aspects as enablers, because education is an enabler. You can't build a new economy without enablers in education. You can't build new economy if you leave the province behind and not take them on the fourth industrial revolution trajectory. So how do we create those enabling environments so that we actually create new economic activity? So what we have started doing in this process, we went to all the CEOs in the big all the companies, and we said, well, we see a gap. There is a gap, and we need to look at how do we create an integrative plan that takes all the work that has been done before, call it a just transition body of knowledge, that's been done by all the consultancy firms, all the research institutes. How do we take all of that knowledge? We take all the closure plans, because all these closure plans are basically done in silos yet again, and all these closure plans identify very specific projects in silos. We take the spatial development frameworks in terms of the spatial aspects of where is the new allocations, and there's a new spatial development framework which is in progress. And we take all the governmental plans and we take all of that and we add some advanced spatial analysis and modeling. So we've done a lot of modeling, economic modeling, and we actually build an integrative, but very importantly, geospatial plan, because we want to put a pin on the map to say, this is where the money is going. Because currently, if you don't have something geospatially, I might yet again be shot for this, because if you go to many of these investment conferences, you see all these billions of rands being pledged. Then if you start asking a question, and I have asked this question before, and ask, so where's the money going? Then nobody can put their finger on the map to say, this is where the money is going. So if we start building something that says, these are the initiatives, these are the projects, these are the transitions, and this is where it's going to happen, then we have an implementable plan that is investor ready, that we can actually say, as a collective, this is what we want to do, and this is where we're going. And this is just examples of economic analysis that we're doing to look at what is the strong points. So for example, This is just a model for the Groep mine and all the activities around that mine, so that we understand what is economic activity around the closure of that mine. So yet again, if you start looking at the competitiveness of the sectors around that mine, interesting enough, the first one is chemicals. Say, well, so we have a very strong sector that is very competitive around that mine that's going to close, and that is in chemicals. So then my question would be, from a circular economy perspective, so can we go and transition that sector that is strong in green chemicals? So can we transition what's there into new sectors that is maybe looking after a bit of a greener economy? And those are the type of questions that we need to start asking, to say, well, we are going to have sunset sectors like mining. There is competitive sectors built around us, and how do we then transition those competitive sectors into new things that can be internationally or nationally competitive and still actually perform its function, rather than that we close that chemical sector because the mine is closing. So the analysis must be slightly different, and that's where the link comes into the circular economy, is that many of these things, and this is just the example, so I'm going to, from the Dungela mine. So this is basically part of the closure process or closure plan, and it's called the green engine, and so I'm not going to take credit for this. This is basically the way that they see mine closure will happen. And if you start looking at this, it actually contains a whole circular economy approach to say, well, we need to look at housing and training and biogas and crops and biodiesel and renewable energy, and we need to do tire pyrolysis and recycling, because there's a lot of things left behind by the mine when it closes. So how do we use this, and all the lines are the interactions in the circular economy between all of these functions? How do we actually do all of this on a mine site? But if you look at this picture, this is billions of rands of investment to actually create this picture on any site. It is too big for one organization to tackle. And that's why organizations or platforms like the Impact Catalyst was created to say, well, if we want to do this as a collective and we do this at the regional level, so say, well, we cannot, so these are the projects that we're currently busy with, already started with this process. We cannot do tire pyrolysis, and we're not doing tire pyrolysis, we're going to do something like, we're busy with something much bigger. So how do we recycle or reuse tires left over by all the mines, by all the power stations, and a regional level? Because if you create something competitive in the Nkankala district, as example, you don't have everybody that have to go invest in the same thing. You can actually pull investment from 15 organizations and you create something that serves everyone. And this is now where the beauty comes in terms of different models, is to say, well, how do we work collectively to actually make a picture like this happen? Because nobody is going to take out the billions to build this. But collectively, if you pull funding from multiple organizations and you can show that there's a plan and there is already investment from multiple organizations, much easier to attract donor funding or capital investors to actually invest in these things, because it becomes investor friendly. What we're trying in many cases to do is that we're trying to do this picture as a municipality or a provincial government or national government in isolation, and the big corporates is doing this on their own, but nobody's winning. So because nobody gets traction, because nobody, firstly, in many cases, is not investor ready, and secondly, it is just too big. So I'm going to skip some of these slides. And then, of course, as part of this whole circular economy, as was explained in this slide, agriculture is a large portion of this, and you see that farming. So as part of this whole process, what we have also started with is looking at how do we use, through the Mine Water Coordinating Body, we've launched a few projects. And this is a beautiful project that we have just finished. We took mine property. Glencore was very kind enough to basically allow community to farm on one of their properties. And we used mine water to actually irrigate the crops. Basically growing zinc-infused maize or wheat for Kellogg's, and basically seeing if we can repurpose a lot of these properties, and if we have big organizations like Kellogg's is willing to sign offset agreements, can you create new sustainable businesses? And this pilot was really exciting, and it actually delivered enormous results. The maize was actually above expectation, or the wheat, sorry. And what now resulted in this is to say, quite a few of the other mines are saying, but great, we like this. We have lots of properties, and in future when the mine closes, we're going to have more properties. So how can we repurpose these properties where it creates masses of jobs? Because a project like this creates 30 jobs per 3,000 hectares. So you can create hundreds of jobs through the process. That catches a lot of the jobs what actually happens when you start closing a mine. So projects like these, and of course, it fits into the bigger circular economy approach. You say, well, great, you have now wheat, and there's still a lot of other biomass available. How do we actually reuse those biomass for biodiesel? Also one of the projects we're busy with, and basically start building this map out in terms of this green engine picture, one by one by one. Because you can't do this with a switch. It's not a switch. You can't just flip the switch and then all of these things exist. But if you have a plan, you can actually start building these things piece by piece. And that's basically what we're doing. We just launched a big alien vegetation program. We are deploying 4,000 youth, removing alien vegetation, and the next phase of that is going into biodiesel, so biomass to biodiesel. And this is just the way that we look at how do we create resilient economies. So I said we did a lot of modeling. This is just an example from the Northern Cape. So what this picture, we basically create our own index because we needed to understand what does the economy look like around each one of these big areas that we operate in. And yet again, it links back to the circular economy, because how this index works is the lighter the block, the more resilient that ward is. So basically, we've done it on sub-municipality level, on ward, so we can see each community what is the economic activity. So what you'll see is that there where the little red circle is, that ward goes from light to darker to darker. So which means that specific ward over time is more and more dependence created on one sector. And actually what you want is that in all of these areas, you actually want them as light as possible, because it means you have resilient communities. You have communities, when the mine closes, then they are not dependent just on mining, and they will continue. The darker that is, when some economic activity happens, like a mine closes, that community is actually devastated. And we see it quite a lot in the history of South Africa. So we basically created this to understand what is economic activity, and then how to invest in those communities to create more resilience. And of course, when you start looking at that, you say, well, we need to diversify investment in these areas, and we need to maybe create something in the waste economy, because there's a lot of waste in all of those little blocks. And that diversifies maybe the economy slightly. That is actually a good investment. So we've been trying to reposition investment from big corporates to create more resilience. Because otherwise, what's happening in Mpumalanga, if we look at the amount of jobs that's going to be lost, you actually don't want to get into that space again. You actually want to actively create resilience in economy across the country over time. And then when you have mine closure, or power station closure, that you don't sit in the same space. So then we also use this as our M&E tool, because when we plug in, for example, a tire recycling plant in that block, and we measure this every 6 months, we can see maybe there is a diversification in that community or in that municipality, and use that almost as our M&E to say, well, great, we made an investment and we can see that economically the activity is changing and the investment didn't just provide a return on investment in terms of financial, but it also have a social return on investment in terms of the economy there. And this is just our social progress indicator that we do something very similar. So I'm not going to go into much detail. It's just basically we measure each place, we yet again on ward level, 52 indicators to see how our activity is changing, because you need to have some sort of M&E tool that sees if you invest in education, that things are changing. Otherwise, you're just making investments and you can't prove something changing. And if you can't prove, then tomorrow you're not going to get any more investments in projects or donations. So it's just basically what we do. So that's it. That was just a quick overview and in terms of how we approach the circular economy and a just transition. And of course, I think a very important lesson that we all need to learn from this is that I think nobody's ever in the world been 100% successful in the transition process. So there's a lot of lessons to be learned, and yet again, if you learn those lessons as a collective, it's much easier than everybody learning their lessons individually, and nobody benefits from those lessons. So by working together and putting minds together, because this is of the national interest of all of us, to actually make sure those processes runs properly. And by putting collective intellectual capital into something, the probability of actually success is much higher than everybody trying to do their own thing. That's it from my side. Thank you very much.